Our next panel, The Autonomy Revolution, Robotics in Defense and Intelligence, will be moderated by Dr. Matthew Johnson, Senior Research Scientist at the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. Please welcome our speakers. Retired Lieutenant General Clint Hinote, Advisor at the Special Competitive Studies Project and Principal at Palace Advisors. Joseph Larson, Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff at Anduril Industries. Dr. Megan Anderson, Executive Vice President of Technology at In-Q-Tel, and Dr. Lorenz Meier, CEO of Auterion.
All right, good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. If you had the short rib, you chose wisely. It was delicious. Today we're here to talk about the autonomy revolution, specifically in terms of the defense and intelligence community for this panel. So that's what we're going to focus on for the next 30 minutes. And we really want to get into the current and future projections of where autonomous systems are going in this space, and specifically focus on capabilities and also potential limitations and challenges. So with that, we'll kick it off with a very open-ended question here. Try to keep it to about a minute. Is this actually a revolution? Is this just the next step in development, or do you think there's a revolution going on here? What about this makes it different? We'll start at the far end with Clint.
Sure. Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks to SCSP. What a great event. Well done. Honored to be up here with my fellow panelists. The question of revolution is interesting. I've studied military strategy, military history a lot. I kind of had to as I was thinking about the future of our military. And this feels like one of those moments where it's evolutionary until it's not. And what do I mean by that? This feels like one of those moments where we get to a tipping point. And the combination of autonomy, robotics, advanced computing is going to lead to something that is revolutionary. And I believe we're at the beginning of that. I think we see that in many of the areas around the world where you're watching this technology evolve. I think if, God forbid, we were to get into a great power war, we don't want that, but if we did get into that, I think you would see this become revolutionary very fast. I think you would see us take advantage of the confluence of these technologies, and they would be put into service at a rate that would make all of us we would be very impressed with how fast that would go. And so my sense is we're on the cusp of a revolution, and depending on world events, we might get there sooner rather than later.
All right, Joe?
I'm uncomfortable with the term revolution. And the reason why I'm uncomfortable with the term revolution isn't a semantics question. It's a question of what it means in terms of the procurement and integration of these systems into our national security enterprise. When we use the term revolution, that seems to imply that we need to completely overturn some kind of existing order, and I'm not sure that that is the case. Is it an evolution? Is it an advancement? Is it a necessity to maintain parity with our adversaries? The use of autonomous, uncrewed, AI-enabled systems? Absolutely. Does it require rethinking everything we do in the Defense Department in terms of acquisition, integration, warfighting? Absolutely not. So I think to the extent that when I say it's not a revolution, that's not interpreted to mean it's not meaningful. It is meaningful, it's extremely meaningful, but it doesn't mean we need to upset the apple cart in every direction. And I would advise those that there are ways to responsibly lean into the integration of these systems, the procurement of these systems that interacts seamlessly with the way we fight wars today. And so for that reason, I would probably not use the term revolution to describe the nature and advancement of these systems.
Really good comments. Megan?
Yeah, and first I'd like to start by thanking SCSP for the opportunity to speak today. This is a really important topic, and I'm glad this conversation is happening. So I am going to follow suit with Clint and Joe. I don't think we're quite at a revolution yet, but I do think the opportunity we have right now is looking at the changes we're seeing in technology and how you can leverage AI with these technologies. We are developing a lot of the fundamental pieces that we are going to need for an autonomous revolution. So I think the rest of the technology industry is helping set this up to be successful in the future, but I don't think we're at a revolution at this point.
And the last word.
Good, that leaves me to take the counterpoint. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and what I've seen there is not necessarily, I also want to be careful with the term revolution. It ages usually badly, poorly. But what I'm seeing is that commercial technology is getting on eye level with modern weapon systems, not with air dominance and all the things that a NATO force would fight with. But given the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, they are able to render existing weapon systems ineffective. For example, drones have reached 25 kilometers standoff distance. That's way longer than the main gun of a main battle tank. So suddenly tanks are probably going to enter into a new role. I'm not saying they're obsolete. And it's commercial technology at commercial price points, and quite frankly, also at commercial accessibility. So when we used to have the defense industrial base responsible for providing these systems, now it's a lot more accessible. And we have autonomous systems fighting autonomous systems. You might have seen footage on Twitter where we have air combat between drones. Does that lower the barrier to conflict because now you can just send your robots against somebody else's robots? I'm not quite sure about all of that, but if that comes together as a revolution, but I do believe that it is not just an incremental improvement, it's a pivotal shift. And in particular, we see that also in the Red Sea, it makes weapon systems a lot more accessible. And that might disrupt international policy more than we're anticipating right now.
Really good observations. That leads perfectly into my next question, which will be for Clint here. In your role as Deputy Chief of Staff for the Air Force, you led an organization known as Air Force Futures. So how do you see autonomy and AI revolutionizing air power in the coming decade?
Yeah, so as I was working at Air Force Futures and leading a great team, what I saw was these, I said it before, this confluence of technology that was going to change the way we fight. And clearly we're seeing that evolve right now. And as I've said before, I think if we were to get into a conflict, it would go so fast, none of us would recognize it. But when we think about the things that robots have done, and robot drones certainly in the air, one of the great things that they've been able to do is democratize air power for just about any formation that's out there. That includes very small formations on the ground. I'll point you to the drone footage of the Hamas leader that we all saw in the papers. That was a drone that was being used at the very, very local level. And then this goes all the way to drones that are being used for air power as far as getting air superiority, as well as doing very, very important strategic intelligence work, and everything in between. And so we're seeing in air power specifically, because the drone technology is fairly mature as opposed to other domains, we're seeing how air power enables forces from every level, from the very small unit level all the way up to the national level. And it makes it more accessible for everybody. And I think you're going to see an increase in the proportion of power, combat power, in our services, in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force in particular. And you're going to see an increasing proportion of that combat power be filled through autonomy and robotics. And in a few years, I'm not sure that we will recognize some of the formations that will be out there because it will be so heavy in robotics. And this is why I say I'm really looking forward to how this allows us to do the same missions in a different way, in a more effective way, and frankly in a safer way for our people.
So Joe, that leads us to a really interesting question. Where does all this new stuff come from, right? So in Anduril, you're a large collaborator with the relatively new Defense Innovation Unit of the DoD. From an industry perspective, how successful is this model of acquisitions? And what improvements do you think we need to do in that area?
There's certainly more we need to do in the area to align with my colleague that's speaking about the introduction of commercial technology into the defense ecosystem. I'm shocked that this is still an issue of some controversy. Clearly, we need to do more to integrate available commercial technologies into what we do. I like to tell the story in terms of a historical trend we've seen, which is the endurance of empires is aligned almost proportionally with the degree that the national security establishment interacts with and consumes the technology that's developed by industry in that culture. We see this going back to antiquity. The Romans advanced because the military was able to leverage commercial advancements, trade, currency. The Dutch and English were able to seamlessly integrate naval power with merchant shipping for both military and commercial means. In World War II, we were able to bring together manufacturing and industrial capacity to defeat our adversary, and there was great alignment. And to a large part, that's been the endurance of the American empire. Well, where are we at today? If you look at the top companies by market capitalization, they tend to be digital companies. They tend to rely on the software stack as their primary intellectual property value. They tend to invest extensively in internal research and development to build finished products. They tend to innovate in advance of requirement. It's not about the specifics of the technology. We could talk all day about autonomy, AI, features of those, machine learning, but really it's about the overall corporate model, right? It's about the way that we take investment, we turn that investment into products, and then we consume those products for national security advantage. And I would argue that despite the great work that's been done by the Defense Innovation Unit and others, we still do not see a full alignment, not even close, between the bulk of DoD procurement, what happens in the PEOs, what happens in the services, and what's happening in terms of commercial innovation in the overall ecosystem. So when we look at that historic trend of alignment between the national security enterprise and the sources of commercial and industrial innovation, that lack of alignment concerns me greatly.
Excellent. Megan, for you, in your role as Executive Vice President of Capabilities at In-Q-Tel, you're heavily invested in delivering high-impact technical solutions. What are the most promising robotics and AI solution capabilities you have or that you see on the immediate horizon?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of promise for robotics in the intelligence and the defense industries. And we have been investing in robotics companies and the components underlying robotics for the last 20 years. And we've made many investments in this space, including my colleagues on this stage into their companies. And what we are seeing is some of the near-term applications and where we're seeing a lot of interest from the intelligence communities is looking at places where you can use robotics to take people out of dangerous situations. This seems pretty common sense, but the technologies are getting to the point where there's a lot of opportunities to use robotics for surveillance type applications. And we're seeing this in the drone space. We're seeing this on the ground platform-based sensors, as well as a lot of maritime applications. And looking at this, there's a lot of ground that can be gained to get people out of dangerous situations and get them the information they need. The second area where there's a lot of promise, it's not quite as interesting, but it's definitely as necessary, is looking on the support logistics side for the intelligence and the defense communities. There's a lot of logistical support that needs to be taken care of, from running warehouses to manufacturing to logistics to shipping to supplies from that perspective. And we're seeing a lot of companies and a lot of commercial pull in developing technologies that can be applied in these areas, such as warehouse automation, looking at tracking of technologies. And these will help the government be more efficient in a lot of their kind of support missions they need to do and give them more flexibility to do other applications as well.
All right, that leads right into a good question about the Ukraine. Lorenz, given your familiarity with this space, and I think a lot of people have probably seen stuff on the web about lessons learned and things that are going on there. Can you give us a little bit of what you take away from this in terms of what is the way technology is being used now and how it's changing the future landscape of defense and intelligence?
I think there's immediate visible, there are kind of three key observations. There's the immediate visible thing, which is that Ukraine is innovating incredibly fast. And pulling commercial technology, for example, eliminating tanks and doing even artillery counter-battery fire with consumer drones. We've all seen the videos, it's all obvious. There's an argument to be had that with proper air power, a lot of that wouldn't be necessary. But also, well, that technology has been created now. What does that actually mean? It, for example, means that for our own forces, there is now fairly accessible technology under $1,000 that can threaten one of our own main battle tanks over about 12, 15 miles. The second piece, and that's really, really important, is, well, it's the first large-scale conflict in Europe which forces new technology to be developed in an all-out war. And of course, we've seen similar developments in Iraq with the MRAP and other programs. But still, it's forcing, since the first time since World War II, a development of technology at an unprecedented pace, and it's mostly targeted, at autonomous systems. And we should not underestimate that, because airplanes have been around 30 to 50 years before World War II, but we entered World War II with biplanes, and we exited it with jet planes within a couple of years. So let's not underestimate the compression of time that this conflict does. And then I think the last piece is, I'm personally concerned, and that's why we're spending a lot of time there, I'm personally concerned that our adversaries, Iran, Russia, China, are jointly learning from that conflict. And we, and I'm going back a little bit to the historical setting of World War II, and we're not fully connected to the conflict. We're helping, but we're not fully connected to the conflict. We're not transforming. We don't feel the force of transformation. And this was what, to a large degree, caught the Allied forces facing Germany off guard. They were going into fights with tanks, with cavalry. And so how do we make sure we are connected? And we have a very naive, simple solution, which is, well, we have to be there. We have to be there, we have to be in the fight. We have to learn, we have to bring that back to the domestic industrial base. And I'm not meeting a lot of my colleagues and other companies out there. It's like I'm running into Brits, I'm running into Dutch, not so much here, and that should all worry us a little bit, because are we learning at the speed of conflict or not? Are we learning fast enough?
That's a really good question. I'm going to stay with you for a minute, if you don't mind, because I have a follow-on question that's somewhat related, I think. You have been an influential driver in open source collaboration in the international drone industry. And so, given that a lot of these current military products are coming commercially, they're not coming from defense agencies, they're off-the-shelf stuff that they're cobbling together, and they're built largely on open source infrastructures. How do you see that playing out? How do we balance the need for collaboration and the need to be able to conceal our tactical advantages? Or can we conceal them anymore?
So I think there are two elements to it. So first, for example, our company develops terminal guidance to engage targets at great distance. That terminal guidance system is regulated, proprietary, protected, of course. But we also leverage a lot of the commercial computing environment that's out there with embedded Linux or open source flight control software, like everybody else. Like the leading operating system for loitering munitions, doesn't matter if they're American, Israeli, German, is embedded Linux, which is the same operating system used by AWS and Google Cloud and Microsoft in servers. Why? Because it's commercial technology that serves the need of this. So there's a lot of commercial adoption already in the defense industrial base by existing primes that is not being talked about, but that's by now absolutely instrumental. And I think we have been a little bit more vocal, and we have explained more how we leverage some of that underlying technology. But in the end, our approach to building products is the exact same as like one of an existing prime. When it comes to the kinetic military functionality, we protect that like everybody else.
Excellent. Megan, along those lines, with respect to the public-private and DoD partnership between government and industry, how does an organization like In-Q-Tel facilitate transition of cutting-edge technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. And at In-Q-Tel, that's the heart of what we do. And we were founded back in 1999 when the government R&D budgets were declining and technology was really starting to move rapidly in the commercial market. And there became a chasm of how do you access that technology when you're sitting in a government environment when most commercial companies didn't have any awareness or idea of how to work with the government. So you fast forward 25 years down the road, we are a non-for-profit that supports 15 government agencies, and our job is to go out and find commercial technologies, understand what the roadmap of that technology is, and look at how that technology can be applied to government problems. And then the important key of what we do is we help companies enhance the technology so it can also support government applications, but we don't try to fork the technology to make it a government-specific product. By doing this, we can help the companies make stronger products in things that have enhanced security, different form factors, different application models for use in different environments, and they can sell this commercially, but it also becomes available for the government to buy, and that leads companies to not have to maintain a government product line and a commercial product line and make hard decisions about what they should be funding and where they should be putting their efforts. But it also opens up that commercial ecosystem and primes it to have the enhancements you need for the government to use the technology. And the other piece we try to keep in mind is when we're looking at funding companies on behalf of the government, we try to make sure there is a commercial application for everything we are doing. If you try to look at things that don't really have clear commercial usability, that becomes really hard for the companies to justify to their investors why they should pursue those paths or how that doesn't distract them from what they need to be doing commercially to meet their other obligations. And in the autonomy space, there's a lot of opportunity of technologies that works both for commercial and government applications. So we try to help companies identify the best of that to the government so they can use commercial technologies when available and save the bespoke development for where the government has specific needs.
Excellent. And Joe, similarly, how is Anduril approaching the challenge of integrating these new AI and robotics capabilities into the DoD?
Yeah, I'll answer that question and sort of offer a counterpoint. When we talk about the use of commercial technology, one thing I would highlight about our approach at Anduril is we're not a dual-use company. In fact, we do not develop commercial technologies for non-national security use. Our entire business is in support of the national security enterprise. And I'm not saying that that needs to be every company, but I would argue that it's somewhat of a fallacy to think of when we talk about commercial technology that there's some pot of available tech that's out there that the government just hasn't procured in the missions that Anduril supports. And should they procure it, the mission will be solved. That's just not true, right? We know that to not be true. However, we also know that the government, as a monopsony buyer with something like $8 trillion, according to the last GAO report, programmed for its largest weapon systems, has the opportunity within a government ecosystem to use commercial practices in order to build internal government markets for technology. That's the approach we advocate for. And the program offices, the acquisition officials who have recognized their role as a buyer with substantial resources offers an opportunity to create markets where new entrants can come in, competition can be ongoing and iterative. You can deploy prototypes and test those in the field. You can avoid this fallacy of prediction, right, that really underpins a lot of the systemic failures of our DoD acquisition enterprise, right? The POs that have embraced those notions are showing great success because they're using commercial approaches, not necessarily just the off-the-shelf procurement of commercial technologies in order to drive their programs forward. So within Anduril, we lean into that. We're not developing dual-use technologies. We're not trying to build a commercial technology that we optimize for commercial customer and sell it into the government. We're working explicitly within government channels to build government purpose solutions using commercial R&D models, innovative software models, and trying to adopt an approach where the government acts as more as a developer of markets and commercial markets than it does a traditional acquisition PEO, which is just selecting a winner with a pot of money.
Excellent. So we got time for one more question, which we'll run down the line, and we'll start with Clint here. So we're talking about robotics and AI, but all of these systems work with and alongside human beings, and it's really about expanding the human potential, not necessarily about any particular tech. So do you think we're missing anything on that front in terms of how you integrate these systems, this new technology, with particularly the DoD workforce?
Well, that's a great question, and the honest truth is we don't know the answer yet because we're very much at the infancy of where we are going to be as we think about human-machine teaming. You know, way back in 2016, I'm looking at some of my fellow colleagues who were there, we were working on the third offset, and we identified the key part of the third offset as being human-machine teaming, that there was this idea that if somehow you could gain the potential goodness of humans doing what humans do best, machines doing what machines do best, bring it together in the context of military operations, you would be pretty hard to beat. And I still believe that to be true. And we are learning our way to that, but there is a lot of ground to plow, so to speak. And so I think what we're going to see, well, at least what I hope we see, is that we see almost a DevOps approach to human-machine teaming, which is we'll figure out what works and then we'll expand on that and then we'll make some changes to it and we'll iterate and we'll keep going, because I don't think any of us know what human-machine teaming looks like in 5 years for the military. But I think we can learn our way there. And my hope is that we will put into place human resources organizations that allow for that learning to happen. And I think that would also be really attractive to young people as they think about where they want to spend their time in their professional careers. And if somehow they can find themselves in this learning environment, figuring out how human-machine teaming can work, I think it would be something that they could really enjoy as they are contributing to national security.
1 minute, Joe.
The most interesting initiatives we have seen embrace the notion of what we call prototype warfare, which is the notion that the prediction of exactly what the next conflict will look like is impossible. And I would argue one of the risks with Ukraine, and we should be learning those lessons, is to say, but all of those lessons apply to the next conflict. Likely, actually not true. There's, depending on what the next conflict is, there'll be variations and permutations. And so the DoD needs to adopt a flexible mentality, right? This idea of prototype warfare, of field to learn, of taking systems that you procure, you putting them out in the field, seeing how they operate, bringing in the operator, the user as a part of the acquisition ecosystem, right, to be able to refine the technology and feed back to the developers, is a place where the DoD needs to lean in a lot more. And I think with more prototype warfare and then balancing that against very real concerns about challenges with large-scale integration and challenges of large-scale production, right? One of the reasons why we like prediction is because with prediction you can build the pathways to produce at scale. It's hard to do that with prototypes. However, that doesn't negate the necessity with the future technology environment of doing more with prototypes in the field.
Excellent. Megan?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of one-to-one use of autonomous systems at the time, with one user controlling one platform. And where this really will become game-changing on the implementation side is when you have your one-to-many scenario, one operator operating many systems, and ideally many different complex systems that are working with each other to make decisions as they're going along. We need some more technology development to get to that point, but we should start planning on how you would kind of change the mentality from one person owns one system to one person is going to look at the swarm of robotics. And I think it's going to take a lot of training and a lot of scenario planning, as Joe mentioned, to get to the point where there's a better idea on how to implement that, but that would really be a game changer for our defenses and intelligence communities.
Excellent. Last minute is yours.
I think the main change that we actually saw in Ukraine is that everything happens in a 2-week cycle. And adopting that speed of development is something that I think is relevant, independent how exactly these weapon systems and learning translate. I'm also in Taiwan soon. I think we need to get ready for whatever happens. So the user is actually the best way for me to share that from the Ukraine experience is there are a lot of special forces in Ukraine that are not using their rifles anymore. They're using drones, they're using autonomous technology, they operate on 12, 15, 20 mile standoff distance. Then what the targets they strike, those are still the same targets, high value targets behind enemy lines. How they strike them has completely changed. And what we as a company try to do is to make this technology so accessible, you don't need to be a good pilot. You can just tap on a screen. So I do think the user piece is really important. And we should assume that warfare in the future, at the time of conflict, will be a very fast iteration. We need to build a system for it.
Yep, really good points all. I'd like to thank our speakers for their great insights and comments.